It was a Tuesday morning when Keanu Reeves decided he needed something different. Not the kind of different you get from a new movie role or a fancy dinner at some restaurant where the plates are too small and the portions make you laugh. The kind of different that comes from just being normal for a while. Being nobody. Being nobody was becoming increasingly difficult in his life, so he made a plan. He threw on a pair of old jeans that had been sitting in his closet for years, the kind that actually fit like jeans were supposed to fit, not like you were trying to squeeze into something designed by someone who'd never actually worn clothes before. Then he grabbed a faded blue baseball cap from a drawer, the kind you get at a hardware store for free when you buy something. Over that went a gray hoodie he'd owned long enough that it had that perfect worn-in feel, the sleeves fraying just slightly at the cuffs. He looked in the mirror and barely recognized himself. That was exactly what he wanted. The drive to the small-town dealership took him through country roads that reminded him why he loved America. Just simple, quiet stretches of land with the occasional barn or a house set back from the road, smoke curling from a chimney. He turned up the radio just enough to fill the silence, but not enough to really pay attention to the music. It was one of those mornings where you don't want to think too hard about anything. You just want to feel the road beneath you and know that somewhere, out there, things are still simple. The dealership was the kind of place that had been there forever. Not fancy, not trying to impress anyone. Just a row of cars sitting in a lot with a small building that probably hadn't been painted since the 90s. There were a few salesman cars parked out front, the kind that look like they've seen 1,000 transactions and couldn't care less about making a good impression. Keanu pulled into a spot toward the back of the lot and sat for a minute before getting out. He wanted to feel like a regular person, and regular people probably took a breath before buying something as big as a truck. When he walked inside, the dealership smelled exactly how he expected it to smell. Like coffee that had been sitting in a pot for too long, cheap carpet that had absorbed decades of feet walking across it, and that particular smell that all car places seem to have, something between rubber and hope. A couple of people were sitting on the waiting chairs, their eyes on their phones, not really paying attention to anything else. An older guy in a white shirt was thumbing through paperwork behind the front desk, looking like this job had long ago stopped being interesting to him. Nobody looked up when Keanu walked in. Nobody even glanced his way. This was perfect. He walked straight through the dealership and out the back glass doors that led to the lot itself. The trucks were arranged in neat rows, gleaming under the morning sun. He'd done some research before coming here, nothing crazy, just enough to know what he was looking for. He didn't need something brand new that cost more than most houses. He needed something real. Something that had a job to do and did it without complaining about the arrangement. He started walking down the rows slowly, letting his hand run across the sides of trucks as he passed them. There was something honest about a truck, he thought. It wasn't trying to be something it wasn't. It was just a tool. A good one could last a lifetime if you took care of it. There was something beautiful about that simplicity. About halfway down the third row, he stopped. There was a truck sitting by itself, a deep blue Ford F-150 that looked like it had maybe 40,000 miles on it. It wasn't the newest thing on the lot, but it wasn't old either. It was the kind of truck that looked like it had actually done some work, carried some loads, gotten its hands dirty. But it was clean now, recently detailed, and something about the way it sat there just felt right. He walked around it slowly, checking the tires, looking at the condition of the paint, running his hand along the truck bed. This one. This was the one. He went back inside and found the young guy who'd been working at the front desk standing up now, looking around like he was trying to figure out what to do with himself. Keanu walked over and said in a casual voice, not trying to sound like anything special, just a guy who needed help. "Hey, I'm interested in the blue F-150 out there. The one in the third row." The young guy's eyes did a quick scan of Keanu's face, trying to place him maybe, but nothing landed. He just nodded and said, "Yeah, sure, that's a good truck. Let me get my keys." They walked back out together, and the guy started going through the usual spiel that salespeople go through. He talked about the engine, the mileage, the condition of the transmission, the warranty that was still good on it. But Keanu barely listened to the words. What he was interested in was the guy's honesty. Was he trying to oversell this truck? Was he being straight with him, or was he already spinning the story to make it sound better than it was? The guy seemed honest. He didn't pretend the truck was something it wasn't. He didn't try to talk Keanu into something more expensive or try to convince him this was the bargain of the century. He just stated the facts and let Keanu decide if he was interested. That was a good sign. "Can I take it for a test drive?" Keanu asked. The guy nodded and they went back inside to get the keys. While he was processing the paperwork, Keanu introduced himself as Ken. It was close enough to his real name to feel honest but far enough away to create that distance he needed. Ken was just a regular guy looking for a regular truck on a regular Tuesday. Nobody needed to know anything more than that. The test drive was what sealed it. The engine rumbled to life with that deep sound that tells you something is built to last. The steering felt responsive without being too tight. The truck drove smooth and steady, not pulling to one side, not making any weird noises. He took it out on the country roads, driving past those same fields he'd seen on the way in, and the truck just felt right. It felt like home, which was funny because it was just a vehicle, but that's how it felt. When they got back to the dealership, Keanu knew. This was it. This was what he'd come for. Back inside the office, they went through all the paperwork. The guy was still honest. He didn't try any high-pressure tactics, didn't suddenly try to add a bunch of extra stuff Keanu didn't want. Just the truck, the paperwork, the basics. Keanu signed where he needed to sign, and he used his real name only where it was absolutely necessary. The guy's eyes flickered for just a moment when he saw the name, like something in his brain was trying to work something out, but then he just kept moving forward with the transaction. He didn't say anything about it. He didn't ask for a photo or make a big deal out of anything. He just finished the paperwork and handed over the keys. Those keys felt heavy in Keanu's hand. Not heavy because they weighed a lot, but heavy because of what they meant. They meant freedom. They meant a way to escape into something simple and real. They meant that for the first time in a long time, he'd bought something that nobody would care about, that nobody would write about, that nobody would try to make into something bigger than what it was. He climbed into the cab of the truck and sat there for a minute before starting the engine. The seat was worn in just the right way. There was a coffee stain on the floor mat from someone else's morning, and he smiled when he saw it. This truck had a history. It had belonged to real people who used it for real things. Now it was his, and he was going to be one of those real people for a while. He started the engine and listened to it rumble beneath him. He pulled slowly out of the dealership lot, back toward the country roads, back toward a life where he could just be someone who owned a truck and nothing more. In that moment, driving away in that blue F-150, Keanu felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt at peace. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he'd found something he'd been looking for all along. All he had to do was keep showing up, keep being honest, and see where this simple choice would lead him. The next day, Keanu drove back to the dealership. He told himself he was just coming to ask a few questions about the truck's service history. Maybe he wanted to know if there was any maintenance he should be aware of coming up. Maybe he just wanted to feel comfortable with his purchase. But if he was being honest with himself, he wasn't sure exactly why he felt drawn to come back. Something about that place, about the guy who'd sold him the truck, had stayed with him overnight. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it was there, a small voice saying maybe you should go check on this. He parked the truck in the same spot where he'd left it the day before and walked toward the dealership. It was early afternoon, quieter than yesterday. The sun was bright, and the heat was starting to build up the way it does in late spring. When he stepped inside, the cold air from the AC hit him like a wall, and he had to blink a few times to adjust. Nobody was at the front desk this time. The waiting area was empty. He could hear voices coming from somewhere in the back, from the offices probably, and he decided to walk that way to find the guy from yesterday. As he moved down the hallway toward the back offices, the voices got louder. One of them was the young guy from the truck sale. Keanu recognized his voice right away. But the other voice belonged to someone else, someone older. A manager maybe. They were talking about something that didn't sound like a normal work conversation. There was stress in their voices, a kind of tension that made Keanu slow his pace without meaning to. The office door was pushed halfway open, and without really deciding to do it, Keanu found himself standing just outside of it, within listening distance. He should have knocked. He should have announced himself. But something in what he was hearing made him pause. I can't keep doing this anymore. The young guy's voice was shaky, like he was trying to hold something back. I really can't. It's eating me up inside. There was a moment of silence, and then the older voice responded. It was measured, like someone had had this conversation before and was tired of having it. Look, you're doing fine. You're making good money. Your mom is in a really good place now. The facility has taken good care of her. Can't you just focus on that? Keanu felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't about trucks anymore. That's exactly what I mean, the young guy said, and now there was a tremor in his voice that sounded like tears weren't far away. I sold a truck yesterday. This regular guy, nice guy, seemed like a good person. And the whole time I was walking him around the lot, I kept thinking about how this truck was going to improve his life. It was going to give him something real, something honest. And I was honest with him about that truck. I told him the truth. I didn't try to push him towards something he didn't need. The older guy didn't say anything, so the young one kept going. But that's not how things work here most of the time, is it? Yesterday, before that guy came in, there was an older couple. Maybe in their 60s. They came in looking for a simple used sedan. Something safe, something reliable, something they could afford. I could have helped them with that. I would have helped them with that. But then, he trailed off for a second, and Keanu heard him take a breath. But then that other manager, the one who's always pushing the numbers, he got involved. He talked them into something way more expensive. A model that was outside of what they were looking for. I watched the whole thing happen, and I watched them sign the paperwork, and I could see it on their faces. They knew they'd made a mistake. They looked stressed. They looked scared. Keanu felt something heavy settle in his stomach. I was standing right there, the young guy continued, and I didn't say anything. I just watched it happen. And after they left, I kept thinking about them going home that night, probably telling their kids or their grandkids about this new car they bought. And the whole time they were probably just worried about how they were going to make the payments. The older manager made a sound like he was about to interrupt, but the young guy wasn't finished. My mom raised me better than this. You know that? My mom worked 2 jobs when I was a kid. She'd be up before sunrise and wouldn't come home until after I was asleep. But she did that so I could go to a good school. So I could have options. She taught me to be honest. She taught me to care about other people. She taught me that what matters isn't how much money you have, it's who you are as a person. Keanu's hands clenched without him thinking about it. And now she's got Alzheimer's. She doesn't remember half the stuff she taught me about anymore. She doesn't remember that she raised me to be a good person. But I remember. And every single day I come here and I betray that. Every single day I help people I know are making the wrong choices, and I do it because I need the money to keep her in that facility. There was a crack in his voice now, like he was actually breaking. So yeah, my mom is in a good place. That's because I'm working here. But she wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want me to sell my soul to keep her comfortable. She'd rather be in a regular facility and know that her kid is still the person she raised him to be. I'm the guy who just bought a truck from this man, Keanu said simply. I'm also someone who's had to figure out how to navigate a complicated world without compromising who I am. It's not always easy. Sometimes it's the hardest thing you do. But it's possible. He turned back to the young guy. What's your name? I don't want to call you, the guy, anymore. You deserve more than that. The young guy looked up, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. It's David, he said quietly. David, Keanu repeated, like he was cementing it into his memory. That's a good name. Solid name. David, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Is there any way you can keep working here, keep making the money you need, but do it without compromising your integrity? David shook his head slowly. I don't see how. The manager before the current one, he pushes us hard. He wants us to hit numbers. And the only way to hit numbers is to do what I was doing. To convince people to buy things they don't really need. What if you didn't work for someone like that? Keanu asked. What if there was a different option? David looked confused. The manager looked confused. Keanu could see them both trying to figure out what he was suggesting. Keanu leaned forward slightly. I'm going to make some phone calls, he said. I have some people who work with me. Good people. Honest people. And I'm going to ask them to help figure out your situation. Your mother's care, her facility, All of that. I have resources. I have the ability to help with that part. David started to shake his head, like this was too much, like he was about to cry all over again. I can't accept that. I don't even know you. Why would you do that? Because, Keanu said simply, you sold me an honest truck. In my book, that's friendship. And because your mother raised you right, and right now you need someone to tell you that what she taught you matters. It matters more than money. It matters more than comfort. It matters. The room went completely quiet. You could hear the air conditioning humming. You could hear the distant sound of a car door closing outside. But inside this small office, there was just silence and weight and something shifting. I can't just give you money, Keanu continued, and I'm not going to insult you by trying. But I can help solve the problem that's forcing you into this corner. I can take care of your mother's care situation. I can make sure she's in a good place, a safe place, a comfortable place. And then you don't have to choose between being honest and being a good son anymore. Then you can just be both. David looked like he was going to argue, like he was going to say no, like he was going to come up with reasons why this couldn't possibly work. But something in Keanu's face stopped him. There was no agenda there. There was no angle. This was just a person offering to help another person because that's what decent people do. Why? David asked, and it came out barely above a whisper. Why would you do this? Keanu put his baseball cap back on, covering up the face that David was probably still getting used to seeing. Because I remember being young. I remember feeling trapped. I remember thinking the only way forward was to become someone I didn't want to be. And I remember the moment someone helped me see that there was another way. I'm just passing it forward. The manager stood up then, like he was uncomfortable with the emotional weight of what was happening. Keanu stood up too. I'm going to make those calls, he said to David. From today on, you don't have to worry about your mother. You don't have to worry about money for her care. You can just focus on being the person your mother raised you to be. You understand me? David nodded, tears streaming down his face now, but his shoulders had straightened slightly. Like something inside him was finding solid ground. Keanu extended his hand and David shook it. There was something in that handshake, something real passing between them. Not gratitude exactly, though that was there. It was more like recognition. Like two people understanding each other in a way that didn't need words. I'm going to leave now, Keanu said. You're going to sit here for a bit and let this settle. And then you're going to think about what you want to do next. Not what you have to do. What you want to do. You understand? David nodded again. Keanu walked toward the door, then paused at the threshold. He turned back one more time. One more thing. Your mother would be proud of you. Not because of the money you're making, but because you cared enough to struggle with this. She'd be proud that you're still fighting to be the person she raised. Remember that. And then he was gone. He walked through the dealership, past the waiting chairs and the front desk, back out into the bright morning sun. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. The kind of calls that move mountains. The kind of calls that change people's lives without making a big show of it. Behind him, inside that small office, a young man named David sat in a chair and cried for the second time that morning, but this time it was the kind of crying that comes before healing. The phone calls started that afternoon. Keanu sat in his quiet apartment, the kind of space that doesn't feel like it belongs to anyone famous because he deliberately kept it that way. Just simple furniture, books on shelves, a window that looked out over the city. He made calls to his financial advisor, to people who managed his money, to people who owed him favors from over the years. He didn't make a big production out of any of it. He just explained the situation, explained what needed to happen, and asked people to make it happen. By the end of the day, David's mother's care facility was taken care of. 5 years. Fully funded. No strings attached. Keanu didn't announce it with fanfare or need to be thanked. He just made sure it was done and moved on with his evening. He didn't expect to hear from David right away. He thought maybe a week would pass. Maybe longer. But his phone rang that same evening, around 8 o'clock, and it was David. His voice sounded different than it had in the office. Clearer somehow. Like he'd been crying but also breathing a little easier. I don't know what to say, David started, and Keanu could hear his voice shaking slightly. I got a call from the facility director. She said everything was arranged. She said my mother's care was taken care of for the next 5 years. She asked me if I knew someone named Keanu Reeves, and I told her yes, and she said to thank you. She said to tell you that this kind of thing doesn't happen very often. Keanu listened without saying much. He just let David process what had happened. I can't accept this, David said, but it came out like a question, like he was asking for permission to accept it anyway. I don't know you. Why would you do this? I don't understand. You don't have to understand, Keanu said quietly. You just have to accept it and figure out what you want to do with your life now that you're not trapped anymore. That's all. But I could never repay you, David said. This is too much. You already did, Keanu replied. You sold me an honest truck. You stood up for your own values even when it was costing you. That's worth something. That's worth everything, actually. They talked for a little bit longer. Keanu asked David about his mother, asked what her name was, asked what she was like. David talked about her. He talked about how she'd always believed in doing the right thing, how she'd taught him that character mattered more than money, how even in her illness she still tried to be kind to the people taking care of her. Keanu listened to all of it, and when he hung up the phone, he felt something settle inside him. Something right. 3 weeks later, Keanu got another call. This time it was from the dealership owner. The guy sounded confused and grateful at the same time, like someone had just done something so unusual that it didn't quite make sense. I wanted to call you personally, the owner said. David told me what you did. He told me the whole story. I need to tell you something. I've been running this dealership for 23 years, and I've never seen an employee be so honest about our business practices. Keanu wasn't sure where this was going. He came to me and told me that we have a problem with how we're training our sales team, the owner continued. He said we're pushing people toward dishonesty, and he said that was hurting the business in the long run even though it looked good in the short term. He said people deserve better. And he said he wanted to help fix it. What did you say? Keanu asked. I said yes, the owner replied. I said yes because he was right. And I said yes because anyone brave enough to tell the truth to his boss deserves to have his ideas heard. So I promoted him. I moved him out of sales and into a new position we created. Operations manager. Better pay. Better benefits. And his job is literally to help us figure out how to run this business with more integrity. To help us sell people what they actually need instead of what makes the most commission. Keanu felt something warm move through his chest. This was better than he'd expected. This was something real. I thought you should know, the owner continued. Because without what you did, I think David would have quit. I think he would have gotten out of this business entirely. And honestly, we would have lost one of the good ones. After they hung up, Keanu sat in his apartment for a while, thinking about how things worked. How one small action could ripple out into places you never expected it to reach. How being honest about your struggle could give other people permission to be honest about theirs. A month passed. Keanu had gotten busy with work. A new film project was wrapping up, and there were meetings and interviews and all the usual chaos that came with his job. He was starting to forget about David, not intentionally, but just because life moves forward and new things crowd out older things. Then one day he got a package at his office. It was a small box, nothing fancy, just simple brown cardboard. Inside was a handwritten letter and some photographs. The letter was from David. In it, he talked about going to visit his mother, about sitting with her, about telling her the story of what had happened. He wrote about how his mother had smiled, how she'd held his hand, how she'd said something that had stuck with him. He'd written it out in the letter because he thought Keanu should know. That's how you know a man's real, his mother had said, according to David's letter. When nobody's watching and he still does the right thing. When he gives without needing to get. When he helps someone just because they needed help. That's when you know who he really is. The photographs were of David and his mother. There was one of them sitting in a garden at the facility, both of them smiling. There was one of David standing outside the dealership with the owner, both of them looking comfortable together. There was one that David had taken of himself at his desk, at his new job, looking like someone who just found solid ground after a long time being lost. In the final photo, there was a handwritten note taped to it. It said, "This is me, doing the thing my mother raised me to do. Thank you for reminding me that it was possible. Keanu sat at his desk and read the letter again. He looked at the photographs again. He thought about how easy it would have been to just ignore what he'd heard that day at the dealership. How easy it would have been to walk away, to get his truck, to move on with his life without getting involved. But something had made him stop. Something had made him turn around and knock on that door. Something had made him listen to David's struggle and decide that he had the power to do something about it, so he should. He realized that this was what it really meant to be human. Not the fame or the success or any of that. But the moments when you see someone struggling and you decide you're not going to walk past them. When you decide their pain matters. When you decide to use whatever privilege or power you have to make someone else's life a little easier. He put the photographs on his desk, where he'd see them every day. And he thought about David, going to work in the morning, sitting at his desk in his new job, helping to build something honest and real. He thought about David's mother, safe in her facility, being taken care of, not having to worry about whether her son was destroying himself to keep her alive. He thought about the older couple who'd come into the dealership, the ones David had mentioned. He thought about whether they were ever going to know that someone had thought about them, cared about them, even as a stranger. They probably wouldn't. They'd probably never know that their story had mattered enough to change a whole business's approach to how it treated people. But that was okay. That's what real goodness looked like. It didn't need recognition. It didn't need a news cycle or a story written about it. It just needed to exist in the world, doing its quiet work, making small changes that added up to big ones. Keanu picked up his truck keys from his desk. He drove out to the overlook where he'd gone that first day after buying the truck. He sat in the cab and looked out at the view, and he thought about how a simple decision to buy a truck Incognito had led him here. To a moment where he'd overheard someone's pain. To a moment where he'd chosen to act. To a moment where everything changed, not. The silence that followed was long. Keanu found himself not breathing, just standing outside that office door, hearing something he knew he wasn't supposed to hear. Something that was changing the way he saw everything. The older manager finally spoke. "What do you want me to do about this? You want to quit? That's not going to help your mom." "I don't know what I want," the young guy said, and now he just sounded tired. "I don't know. I just know that I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending that what I'm doing is okay. It's not okay." Keanu backed away from the door slowly, carefully, trying to make sure they didn't hear him. He made his way back to the front of the dealership and stood there in the waiting area, not really looking at anything, just processing what he'd just heard. A young man, probably in his 20s, carrying the weight of his mother's care on his shoulders. Making compromises with his own conscience to afford her medical attention. Stuck between two impossible choices, doing what he thought he had to do while despising himself for doing it. The thing that hit Keanu hardest was the honesty of it. This guy could have just kept his mouth shut. He could have gone along with the system, taken the money, and told himself that everyone was doing it. But he couldn't. His conscience wouldn't let him. He was literally fighting himself every single day, trying to be the person his mother raised him to be while also trying to be the person his mother needed him to be financially. Keanu walked back to his truck and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. He just sat there, thinking about what he'd heard. Thinking about how many people were probably in that same situation, caught between what was right and what was necessary. Thinking about how a simple act of kindness, something that might seem small to him, could completely change someone's life. He started the truck and pulled out of the parking lot, but something had shifted inside him. He wasn't leaving as the same person who had arrived. He was leaving with the responsibility now, whether he wanted it or not. He'd heard someone's truth, someone's real struggle, and he couldn't just pretend he hadn't heard it. He drove with no particular destination in mind, just thinking, trying to figure out what the right thing to do was. Knowing that whatever he did next would need to be genuine and real, not some grand gesture, but something that actually helped. Something that actually mattered. The road stretched out in front of him, and Keanu made a decision. He was going back to that dealership tomorrow, and he was going to do something about what he'd heard. He didn't know exactly what yet, but he knew he couldn't just drive away and pretend this conversation never happened. Sometimes life asks something of you that you never expected. Sometimes you overhear something that changes everything. Sometimes being in the right place at the right time comes with a responsibility to actually do something about it. Both men in the office looked up when they heard the knock. The young guy's face went completely pale, like someone had just switched off the lights inside him. His eyes were red, puffy from crying. The older manager, a guy with gray hair and a tired expression, looked annoyed at first, like he was about to tell whoever it was to come back later. Keanu stepped into the doorway. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, taking in the scene. The young guy's face was turning a shade of red that suggested he was putting together the pieces of what had just happened. This stranger had hurt him. This person had heard his pain. "I'm not here to make trouble," Keanu said quietly. His voice was calm, the kind of calm that comes from someone who's learned how to speak gently even when things are heavy. "I just need you both to listen for a minute. That's all I'm asking." The manager started to stand up, defensive, ready to protect his territory. But Keanu held up his hand, not aggressive, just asking. Something in his eyes made the manager pause. "Just listen," Keanu said again. He looked directly at the young guy. "I bought a truck from you yesterday. You remember me? The guy in the gray hoodie." The young guy nodded slowly, still trying to process what was happening. "Here's what I remember about that interaction," Keanu continued, stepping further into the office. "You were honest with me. You didn't try to talk me into something I didn't need. You didn't spin the truck's history to make it sound better than it was. You didn't try to add a bunch of extra stuff to the bill that I didn't ask for. You just helped me. You did your job with integrity." The young guy's eyes started getting watery again, but different this time. Not the tears of someone breaking down, but the tears of someone hearing something they needed to hear. "Do you know why I noticed that?" Keanu asked. "Because I've spent my whole life around people who weren't honest. People in this industry, in entertainment, everywhere. People who smile and tell you things that aren't true. People who spin and manipulate and convince you to want things you don't actually need. Honesty is rarer than diamonds. It really is. And you had it." The manager cleared his throat uncomfortably, starting to understand maybe that this conversation was deeper than he'd thought. He looked like he wanted to interrupt, but something stopped him. Keanu kept his focus on the young guy. "I heard what you said just now. About your mother. About the way she raised you. About how you're struggling with what this job is turning you into." He paused, letting that land. "That means you're already better than most people. That means your conscience is still working. That means you haven't lost who you are. Not yet. Not completely." The young guy put his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking slightly. "The fact that you're wrestling with this," Keanu continued, "the fact that it bothers you, the fact that you feel bad about it, that's not weakness. That's strength. That's the part of you that your mother raised. That's the good part that's still fighting." Keanu pulled up a chair and sat down. He wasn't trying to tower over these guys. He was trying to be with them, to meet them where they were. "I get it," he said, and something in his voice suggested that he really did. "I get that you're in a difficult position. I get that the money matters because it has to. I get that you're trying to take care of someone you love. Those are all real things. Those are all valid things. But there has to be a way to do it without losing yourself in the process." The manager finally spoke up. "Who are you, anyway?" Keanu pulled off his baseball cap and sunglasses slowly. He watched the manager's face go through a series of expressions. Recognition. Confusion. Something like fear maybe, wondering if this was a setup, if this was going to be a lawsuit or some kind of problem. Just for David, but for everyone around him. The blue F-150 hummed quietly beneath him, solid and real and honest. Just like it was supposed to be. Just like David was learning to be. Just like Keanu was trying to be. He started the engine and pulled back onto the road, heading toward home, carrying the weight of knowing that sometimes, when you pay attention and you're brave enough to act, you can change someone's life just by seeing them and caring about them enough to do something. It wasn't a big thing. It wasn't going to make headlines or win awards. But it was real. And that was everything. 3 months had passed since that day at the dealership. Keanu had been traveling for work, doing press tours for a film that had just wrapped, doing interviews and appearances at festivals. He'd been so busy that sometimes he'd go a whole day without thinking about the blue truck sitting in his garage at home. But when he did think about it, he thought about David. He thought about that moment in the office when two people had recognized something true in each other. The work schedule was brutal. Flights at odd hours, hotels in cities where he didn't know anyone, talking about the same things over and over again to different journalists who all asked variations of the same questions. By the time he got home, he was exhausted in a way that sleep didn't really fix. He was exhausted in his spirit. So on a cool autumn morning, he decided to do something simple. He decided to drive the truck to the dealership. He didn't have a reason. He didn't need anything. He just wanted to feel that simple connection again, that feeling of being nobody, of owning something honest and real. The drive was long enough to clear his head. The truck handled the road like it had been built for exactly this. The sky was that particular shade of blue that only happens in autumn, when the heat of summer is finally gone and everything feels possible again. Keanu had his window down, letting the cool air move through the cab, and for the first time in months, he felt like he could actually breathe. The dealership looked exactly the same as it had 3 months ago. Same building, same cars in the lot, same worn feeling that suggested this place had been here forever and would probably be here forever. He pulled into the parking lot and parked the truck in approximately the same spot where he always parked it. Then he just sat there for a minute, getting used to the quiet. When he walked into the showroom, he didn't see David immediately. There was a different guy behind the front desk, someone he didn't recognize. But then David appeared from one of the back offices, and when he saw the truck through the window and then saw Keanu walking in, his whole face changed. It was the kind of smile that comes from a real place, not a sales smile, but a genuine one. "I was wondering when you'd come back," David said, walking over with his hand extended. Keanu shook it firmly. "How's your mother?" he asked, because that was the only thing that mattered. "Sharp as a tack today," David replied, and there was relief in those words. Real relief. The kind that comes from knowing your mother is okay and you're not destroying yourself to make it happen. She's actually better. The new medication they switched her to is working. And I went to see her yesterday and told her the whole story, the real story, and you know what she said? Keanu shook his head, already feeling something shift in his chest. She said, "That's how you know a man's real. When nobody's watching and he still does the right thing." Then she asked me if I was being the kind of person she raised me to be. And for the first time in a long time, I could say yes without lying. They both just stood there for a moment, letting that settle between them. "Your truck's due for an oil change," David said, and they both laughed at the complete normalcy of it, the way life just kept moving forward with practical matters alongside the profound ones. But before Keanu could respond, the owner came out of his office. He recognized Keanu immediately this time, and there was genuine warmth in his greeting, the kind that comes from gratitude and respect. "I wanted to thank you personally," the owner said, shaking Keanu's hand firmly. "What you did for David changed more than just his life. It changed how we do business here. We've completely overhauled our sales training. We teach people now that long-term trust is worth more than short-term commissions. We show people what they actually need instead of what makes the most money. And you know what? Business is better. We're selling more trucks because people actually come back. They tell their friends. They trust us." Keanu felt something warm move through him. This was the thing about goodness. It wasn't just about one person. It rippled outward in ways you couldn't always predict or control. "David's been instrumental in that change," the owner continued. "He's brought in ideas, he's helped reshape how we approach our customers. He's been incredible. And none of that would have happened if you hadn't done what you did." David looked embarrassed by the praise, the way good people do when they're being recognized for something that came from their own values. As Keanu left the dealership after dropping off his truck for service, he found himself thinking about everything that had led to this moment. He'd come to this small town looking for simplicity. He'd bought a truck looking to be nobody. And in the process of trying to disappear, he'd found something real. He'd found a person struggling, and he'd decided to help. And that simple decision had created waves that he was still watching spread outward. David walked him to his car, the rental he'd driven from the airport. Before Keanu got in, David did something unexpected. He handed him an envelope. My mom wanted me to give you this, David said. She made me promise that I would. She said if you ever came back I should give it to you. Keanu took the envelope carefully. It was handwritten, addressed simply to Keanu. He waited until he was back at his hotel to open it. The handwriting was shaky, the words coming from someone whose hands didn't move quite as smoothly as they used to, but there was intelligence and warmth in every letter. The note was short. My son told me what you did. He told me that you helped him become the person I raised him to be. I don't have much time to understand everything in this world anymore. But I understand that. I understand that you chose to see my son when he was struggling, and you chose to help him. That is grace. That is what grace looks like in the world. Thank you for giving my son back to me. Thank you for reminding him that goodness matters. I will pray for you. I will remember you. You are real. You are the real thing. Keanu sat on the edge of the hotel bed and read that letter 3 times. His eyes got hot, the kind of hot that comes right before tears, but he didn't cry. He just sat there and let the words settle into him like water into soil. He thought about his mother. He thought about the things she'd taught him when he was young, before cameras and fame and the world decided who he was supposed to be. She'd taught him about kindness. She'd taught him that character mattered. She'd taught him that the way you treated people when nobody was watching was the truest measure of who you were. That night, Keanu called his assistant and made some changes to his schedule. He blocked out time. Time that wasn't for work or appearances or any of the usual demands that came with his life. Time that was just for living. Time that was just for being a person. A month later, he took the truck to the cabin upstate. He drove it on back roads, letting the engine settle and hum, feeling the weight of it beneath him. He sat on the porch of the cabin and looked out at trees and sky and nothing else, and he thought about how strange it was that the biggest lesson of his life had come from buying a truck Incognito. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the grand gesture. It was about paying attention. It was about seeing someone's pain and not walking past it. It was about understanding that you have the power to change someone's life, and doing it without needing recognition or gratitude. He thought about David going to work in the morning, sitting at his desk, helping to build something honest. He thought about David's mother, safe and comfortable, not having to worry about her son destroying himself. He thought about the couple who'd come into that dealership, hoping to find a good vehicle, and now instead of feeling trapped, they were probably experiencing honest customer service because of the changes David had helped implement. One action. One moment of deciding to care. And everything had shifted. Keanu understood now why he'd felt called to buy that truck in the first place. Not because he needed a truck, but because somewhere inside him, he'd known he needed something real. He'd needed to strip away all the noise and find his way back to what actually mattered. And in doing that, he'd found David. Sometimes the universe puts things in front of you, Keanu realized. Sometimes it puts a moment in your path and asks what you're going to do about it. The easy thing would have been to ignore it. The safe thing would have been to walk away. But he hadn't done either of those things. He'd chosen to act. He'd chosen to see someone. And that choice had become the thing that reminded him who he actually was. The blue truck sat in the driveway of the cabin, honest and real and simple. Keanu looked at it and smiled. He'd bought a truck Incognito thinking he was looking for an escape. But what he'd really found was his way back to himself. And sometimes that's all any of us really need. To be seen. To be helped. To be reminded that the person we are when nobody's watching is the truest version of who we are. To understand that kindness, real kindness, changes everything. He'd come to that small town dealership looking for nobody. But in the end, he'd become somebody again. The right kind of somebody. The kind his mother would have been proud of. And that was worth more than any truck, any fame, any amount of success the world could possibly offer.